Hello everyone, and welcome to another Cut Rate Commander Precon Upgrade Guide, the series in which we give Precon decks a glow-up without breaking the bank. My name's Grazzet, and today we'll be giving the Modern Horizons 3 Eldrazi Incursion Precon $35 worth of upgrades to bring it up to Cut Rate standards. As usual though, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you like this content. Consider supporting the channel directly either via my Buy Me a Coffee or my Game Nerds affiliate link in the description if you really like it, and be sure to stick around until the end of the video to see what Precon will be covering next. Also, if you'd like to see my blind reaction and thoughts to the Precon itself before any upgrades, you can do so by checking out my first impressions of it also in the description. So, with that out of the way, let's start by taking a look at the commander and playstyle. This deck's face commander is Ulalek'a Fused Atrocity, a 2/5 Eldrazi with Devoid that costs hybrid colorless Wooburg that has the following ability. Whenever we cast an Eldrazi spell, we can pay 2 colorless pips. If we do, we copy all spells we control, then copy all other activated or triggered abilities we control, and may choose new targets for the copies. Breaking down our commander's core stats, Ulalek'a is sporting a higher mid-weight CMC, a very low power but average toughness stat block for his cost, with built-in Devoid to effectively make it colorless, and an ability that, unlike other Eldrazi commanders, actually cares about Eldrazi by not only letting us get 2 for the price of 1 whenever we cast them, but also doubles up on everything else on the stack as well. Now don't get me wrong, the floor of Ulalek'a's ability is terrifying enough, enabling us to double up on the myriad of gigantic Eldrazi with powerful abilities that this archetype has at its disposal, getting us twice the cast triggers on the stack and or twice the ETB triggers as they come down, netting us double the Annihilator triggers as the original and its copy swing in, or simply letting us benefit from any now dual passive effects our newly twinned Eldrazi bring to the table, provided of course we have the spare colorless mana to pay for our bigger entrance, though this effect still works very nicely in conjunction with smaller, more utility-oriented Eldrazi to net us more value, and or to let us build up towards their bigger broodmates. That said, the fact that this copies all spells, activated and triggered abilities we control, not just Eldrazi ones, is what takes this ability from being just good and elevates it to being exceptional, as it enables us to use flash speed Eldrazi creatures and kindred Eldrazi instants, which still proc Ulalek'a since they're Eldrazi themselves, to copy all our spells and abilities on the stack, as well as any of our copied spells and abilities since they're still considered valid targets for copying according to the copy rules. And even if we're not abusing flash speed casting, we can still passively generate double the value out of any triggered abilities that proc as we cast our Eldrazi, providing us with even more benefits by us simply playing into our archetype. So, seeing as Ulalek'a is a tribal commander, albeit one with some interesting utility outside of his archetype, the first thing we'll be doing to upgrade this deck will be overhauling its creature lineup, replacing some of the smaller, more niche Eldrazi included in the base build, with either bigger, more high-impact ones which would be problematic enough for our opponents on their own, but now bring twice the pain alongside Ulalek'a, or smaller ones that can help pave the way for their bigger brethren, especially as we copy them. Then, using what little remains of our budget since Eldrazi aren't cheap, we'll be building up the core build's already robust ramp package even further with both on and off theme entrants to ensure we have the mana needed to both cast and copy our Eldrazi, as well as adding in a few more passive triggered abilities to the build for our commander to double up for us for even more value that we don't have to spend mana for, allowing Ulalek'a and his brood to overwhelm the table and to reduce our opponents and their creatures to dust. So let us planeswalk to the plane of Zendikar, a realm that knows the horrors of the Eldrazi far too well, and travel to the Eye of Ugin, where we'll find the only surviving records of the Eldrazi Titan known as Ulalek'a. The preserved scrolls here, documented by Ugin himself before his disappearance, describe the being known as Ulalek'a being formed as a result of both the Eldrazi Titans Ulamog and Kozilek manifesting on a plane from the same point in the Blind Eternities, resulting resulting in them fusing into a new form and augmenting both of their brood's physical and reality-warping powers to horrifying new levels. The name of the unfortunate plane where this event occurred has long been lost to time, it and its inhabitants having been consumed and reduced to dust by this abhorrent amalgamation and its brood, with Ulalek'a appearing to have disappeared along with it back into the blind eternities, never to be seen again. There is a chance, however, an infinitesimally small but horrifying possibility, that this fusion could occur again on an unsuspecting plane, rebirthing an abomination long lost to time and one that no force in the multiverse can hope to stand against, as its mere presence tears flesh and reality asunder. So, now that we know a bit more about the commander and playstyle, let's jump straight into the upgrades. So, seeing as this precon is a tribal deck after all, the very first thing we'll be doing is augmenting our creature base by swapping out some of its more niche brood members with entrants that can more easily enable our commander and or other Eldrazi either on their own or as we copy them, or instead serve as gigantic beatsticks with powerful effects for us to dominate the table with as we double up on them. Starting in the former camp, we'll be sidelining Mutated Cultist, whose ETB counter removal and ramp tied to it can be a powerful silver bullet against counter-heavy decks, but otherwise is a 3-mana 1/3 Death Toucher, ultimately making it too unreliable for our purposes, so we can put in Herald of Kozilek, whose passive cost reduction for colorless spells is both fantastic on its own or if we double up on it to let us cast most of our spells ahead of curve, not just Eldrazi ones, cutting Ulamog's Nullifier, whose built-in flash can be useful to copy spells and abilities on the stack, but whose spell disruption is too dependent on our opponents having spells in exile, which we can't reliably put there in this deck, in favor of it that heralds the end, which functions as both a cheap colorless lord to empower our swarms of spawn/scions and our bigger Eldrazi, while also reducing the cost of our top-end broodmates so we can get them in play faster and or copy them more reliably, and lastly, replacing Inversion Behemoth, whose repeatable ability to selectively swap power and toughness on creatures can be occasionally useful to let us deal with OXs, but unfortunately is not good for much else outside of that, with Sowing Mycospawn, whose on-cast land ramp is a superb in-tribe way for us to reliably get the newly reprinted Eldrazi Temple into play for us to ramp ourselves even further, and, on top of that, also gives us the option to pop problematic lands as we cast it as well, with both of its effects getting even better as we double up on them. Then moving on to a pair of higher CMC new additions that bring bigger stats to bear but are more geared towards utility rather than raw power, we'll be trading out Drowner of Hope, whose Scion spawning and Scion focus tapdown are serviceable but ultimately overshadowed by better options we have at our disposal, to trade in Conduit of Ruin, which gives us yet another way to cheat on our Eldrazi's massive costs by providing a substantial discount to the first creature spell we cast each turn, and that's on top of also being a colorless high CMC tutor that lets us bring those top-end creatures directly to hand so we can make use of that discount, and Shelving Skittering Invasion, whose big spawn production is not the most reliable source of ramp for us due to its high cost, even if we copy it with our commander, so we can add in Null Drifter, which at worst is a 3-mana draw 2, alongside Ulalek'a can be a 5-mana draw 4 that also nets us an evasive Annihilator 1 body since the copy doesn't count as having been invoked, and at 9 mana nets us the draw and both bodies, making it a superb creature at any point in the game to provide card advantage, repeatable disruption as it swings in, or both. And finally reaching the pinnacle of our brood with the hardest hitting members Eldrazi have to offer, or the best ones we can afford at any rate, we'll be tossing back Elder Deep Fiend, whose built-in flash is again decent at enabling Ulalek'a's effect, but whose lackluster stats and disruption aren't enough to warrant its inclusion, to make space for Breaker of Creation, whose combination of high power, hexproof from each color, and Annihilator 2 usually results in it 3 for 1ing an opponent if they trade with it, or 6 for 2ing if copied, since they won't easily be able to deal with it outside of combat, banishing Titan's Vanguard, who's serviceable at empowering our colorless creatures with +1/+1 counters over time, but lacks the critical mass of those creatures needed to make the most use out of that ability in this version of the build, to summon Pathraiser of Ulamog, which is our most mana-intensive Eldrazi, but whose built-in Annihilator 3 and Super Menace are well worth its cost to pile on the damage and pick apart our opponent's boards either by itself or alongside its doppelganger, Transferring out Sifter of Skulls, whose non-token on-death Scion creation will find a much better home in a more aristocrats-focused build where non-tokens will be sent to the bin more reliably, so we can add in Flayer of Loyalties, who serves as another gigantic annihilating beatstick that also lets us double up on its cast trigger with our commander, letting us temporarily steal and empower 2 creatures off our opponents as we cast it to get in for even more damage and annihilator triggers. And, as our final new Eldrazi entrant, we'll be upgrading Bismuth Mindrender, whose on-damage spell theft effect is powerful but not really what we're looking for in this build, since we'd much rather cast our own spells rather than our opponents, into the Eldrazi Titan Kozilek the Great Distortion, which we're not only running because he's the only Titan we can afford, at least not entirely, but also because he completely reloads our hands as he comes down to replenish our resources, and then sticks around to function as a repeatable free source of spell disruption for us to use to maintain control of the board once our Eldrazi are overrunning it. Now, having covered all the new Eldrazi we'll be adding to the build to proc our commander and beat down our opponents with, let's switch gears to some of the new additions we'll be adding to our ramp package to ensure we can actually get to these gigantic creatures without breaking ourselves, which will start by replacing the mediocre colorless land Ruins of Oran Reef, whose colorless +1/+1 counter distribution is too slow to warrant its inclusion here, the draw spell Ugin's Insight, which is much too expensive for a draw 3 when we have better things to do with our mana, and a board wipe Kozilek's Return, which is an okay instant speed mini wipe that we can get 2 uses out of, but loses out to better options already included in the deck, with the Scion and Spawn creating Path of Annihilation, From Beyond, and Kozilek's Unsealing, all of which passively create Eldrazi tokens we can sack for colorless mana, either on our upkeep in the first 2's case or as we cast our creature spells in the 3rds to help us get to our higher CMC Eldrazi faster, or simply pay for our commander's effect, while also bringing additional upside to the table. The first turning all our Eldrazi into any color mana dorks so they can fix our colors, and so we don't have to sacrifice our spawns and scions to generate mana. The second letting us sack it when we don't need it anymore to tutor for an Eldrazi for added consistency. And the third eventually letting us draw 3 every time we cast one of our CMC 7+ Eldrazi, ensuring we never run out of spells to cast and letting us double up on both of its triggers thanks to Ulalek'a. Then as some more traditional sources of ramp in the form of mana rocks to close out our wave of new mana generating entries, we'll be shelving Ancient Stirrings, whose card selecting colorless cantrip is not needed in this build thanks to its already impressive draw package, along with Vile Redeemer, which just doesn't do enough as an on-death source of ramp other than provide a sad consolation prize of a handful of scions if our board of Eldrazi gets wiped, except for occasionally reprocking our commander's effect thanks to its flash, so we can slot in Thought Vessel and Thran Dynamo, both of which function as superb colorless rocks to ensure we can reliably hit our colorless pips to pay for our commander's effect, or for our colorless pip specific spells, with the former also removing our maximum hand size limit to prevent us from overdrawing, which can happen quite often in this build if we're not careful, and replacing Suffer the Past, whose scalable graveyard hate and player-specific drain is honestly not all that impressive, with Chromatic Lantern, which serves as a rock that taps for all our colors that also instantly fixes us for all our colors as soon as it comes down, thereby ensuring we'll have no issues casting any of our other colored spells despite our overabundance of colorless lands. And at last, reaching our final upgrade for this build, we'll be raising the excess land Temple of Silence, so we can make space for the repeatable draw source up the beanstalk, whose cheap cost and ETB cantrip is nice early to let us dig for more lands, and later becomes a repeatable source of draw as we cast any of our high CMC spells, not just Eldrazi, with the added benefit of its triggered ability being copyable by our commander as we cast our Eldrazi spells for even more card advantage. So, now that we've covered all 16 cards which we've upgraded from the core build, let's take a look at the breakdown for this Precon upgrade. Looking at the stats that matter to our game plan, we have 33 Eldrazi creatures and/or Eldrazi kindred spells in our 99, along with 9 cards that care about Eldrazi, giving us a very solid foundation for this tribal deck to reliably proc Ulalek'a and to generate additional value outside of him as we play into our archetype, 13 cards that care about colorless spells and/or colorless creatures, and 5 cards that care about creatures with high CMC and/or power, which indirectly help empower and generate further value off of our Eldrazi, 2 Eldrazi spells with Flash, which we can occasionally use to get an extra proc off of our commander should the opportunity arise, and 3 triggered abilities that proc as we cast our Eldrazi, which our commander can then double up for us for even more value. For general deck stats, we have 32 ramp sources, 17 card draw sources, 16 targeted removal sources, and 2 board wipes, with most of our core stats outside of our wipes being well above average, primarily due to this deck's need to reliably generate enough ramp to get to our higher CMC creature base, replenish our hand so we don't run out of resources as we use our ramp to cast our spells quickly, and the massive amount of Annihilator triggers our Eldrazi bring to the table. Looking at our mana curve, we have an average CMC of 4.69, leaving us with a heavyweight mana curve that requires us to ramp heavily in the early game so we can make a beeline for our commander, while still having enough mana to cast our big Eldrazi spells and copy them. And while this does admittedly leave us somewhat vulnerable in the early game, it usually only takes a single successful proc off of Ulalek'a to stabilize us, with any further procs allowing us to completely take over the game with 2 or more massive threats every time we do so, positioning us to overwhelm our opponents with game-ending beatsticks turn after turn until our opponents simply run out of answers and are run over by Ulalek'a and his brood. The final price of this build then comes out to be a bank-breakingly expensive $165 after upgrades. This price does not include tax or shipping, and assumes that the price you paid for the Precon was its currently overinflated price of $130, which is the cheapest price I could find at the time of this recording, though theoretically you may have been able to buy it for cheaper if you pre-ordered it early or bought it as part of a set, which would have brought down the price to around $75 instead if split 4 ways. And personally, I would advise waiting for the price to go down if you don't have this deck pre-ordered already to avoid all the price gouging. The price of the cards, however, was calculated using the cheapest listed marketplace price on TCG Player at the time of this recording. Now, if we're looking to side grade this deck in one direction or another while remaining within budget, we can consider replacing Flayer of Loyalties, Azlask the Swelling Scourge, and Eldrazi Displacer with Skittering Cicada, Liberator Urza's Battlethopter, and Vedalken Orrery, all of which let us cast our Eldrazi at flash speed to not only potentially let us copy spells, abilities, and their copies much more reliably, but also letting us benefit from other flash speed casting perks like granting our Eldrazi Pseudo Haste by casting them before our turn gets back to us, and reducing the window our opponents have to react to them, though at the cost of having less Eldrazi in the build overall. Then, if we want to add even more upgrades to the build by going over budget, if we're looking to keep the spending down to a minimum, for an Eldrazi deck anyway, From Beyond can be swapped out for Echoes of Eternity, which is both fantastic on its own as a way for us to passively net us an extra copy of all our colorless spells, and alongside our commander to let us copy its triggered ability to let us copy the spells on the stack even more times, and Azlask the Swelling Scourge can be traded out for It That Betrays, which gives us yet another enormous body with Annihilator to work with this one also empowering all our other Annihilator triggers by letting us permanently steal any permanents our opponents sack to them for additional value. That said, the sky really is the limit on how much we can spend on this deck depending on how much we're willing to go into debt in order to do so, where we can swap out Morophon the Boundless for Void Winnower, whose infuriating stacks effect will prevent our opponents from playing half of their decks, and they'll have to get rid of twice in order to play normally again. Pathraiser of Ulamog, Ulamog's Dread Sire, and Angelic Aberration can be sidelined to make space for the Eldrazi Titans, Ulamog the Infinite Gyre, Kozilek Butcher of Truth, and Emrakul the World Anew, though realistically most of the other Eldrazi Titan cards would find a good home here as well, as even though we can't get extra copies of them due to being legendary, we can still get double the mileage out of all their cast triggers, and they are still terrifying and resilient bodies that our opponents will have to contend with, and, somehow even going higher in price, we can give our land base an overhaul by terraforming Ash Barrens into Eye of Ugin, which is both an Eldrazi ramp piece and a repeatable Eldrazi tutor for us to bring our hardest hitting brood members right to our hand. Though if we want to add any or all of these cards into our build, we may just have to take out a loan in order to do so. Then again, with the deck itself being at least $130, what's another $200 on top of that at that point? No, but seriously, do not buy this deck at that price. It is totally not worth it. Thanks everyone for sticking around until the end of the video. So, with the Eldrazi Incursion Precon upgrade complete, the next build we'll be tackling will be the land-loving Tricky Terrain Precon and its face commander, Omo, Queen of Vesuva. So look forward to that build coming soon. In the meantime though, we do have a new poll for you folks to vote on, and, as is tradition during the Precon season, it features all the alternate commanders from these Precons, all of which are vying for builds of their own. Those being the populating and proliferating Dwarf, Kaith-famed Mechanist, the experience-accumulating and spawn/scion-loving Eldrazi, Azlask the Swelling Scourge, the Arbor Elf-spawning and land-empowering Elemental, Joti Moag Ancient, and a graveyard-value and power-generating human, Korum the Undertaker. So be sure to cast your vote, link in the description, before the deadline on June 21st, and let me know in the comments which commander you voted for and which commanders from this set you'd like to see me feature in future polls. And again, before we close out, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you enjoy this content. Consider donating to buy me a coffee or use my Game Nerds affiliate link if you want to support the channel directly. And if you'd like to see more videos like this one, either click on the videos floating around my head for the latest builds, or click on the card above for a playlist of all the deck techs I've made so far. And with that, have a good one folks, and stay safe.